Welcome to the deep dive. Forget the usual financial noise. We take your sources and distill them into the insights that actually matter.
Right. Think of it as your express lane to becoming truly informed with, surprising takeaways and just enough wit to keep you hooked.
And today, we're laser focused on something fundamental: your money.
And for this deeply personalized exploration, our listener, the learner, has provided excerpts from Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money. Now, this isn't about dry rules or complicated formulas.
No.
Our mission here is to unpack the hidden psychological forces that shape every single one of your financial decisions.
Yeah.
These sources offer a refreshingly human perspective, diving into the emotions and, well, the quirks that define our relationship with wealth.
Exactly. We're going way beyond spreadsheets today. The ideas in these excerpts are, well, they're all over the map. From why brilliant minds can make head-scratching money moves to the astonishing power of just sticking with a plan. Prepare for some serious aha moments, because what drives our finances is often the last thing we consider.
Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever known exactly what you should do with your money, yet done something completely different?
Oh, absolutely. Happens all the time.
That gap between knowledge and action is where our deep dives into the psychology of money really begins.
Precisely. It's one thing to intellectually grasp the mechanics of investing or saving. It's an entirely different challenge to manage your own behavior when those pesky emotions enter the equation.
Right. The book opens with a fascinating story about a tech executive, a genuine visionary, designed crucial Wi-Fi components, sold multiple companies for fortunes. Incredibly smart, right?
Absolutely, a true innovator. But, as the source points out, even this exceptionally intelligent individual could be a complete financial train wreck if they lacked emotional discipline.
Yeah, it's striking. Brilliance in one area doesn't automatically grant you a golden touch with money.
Not at all.
And to really highlight this disconnect, we get the compelling story of Ronald Read. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Ronald Read was a janitor and a gas station attendant.
Not exactly the profile of a financial guru.
Far from it. Humble beginnings doesn't even begin to cover it.
Yeah.
He hitchhiked to high school, apparently.
Wow. Yet, when he passed away in 2014, Ronald Read quietly amassed a net worth of over $8 million.
$8 million. And here's the kicker. No secret strategies, no lottery tickets, no inheritance windfall.
So how did he do it?
He simply saved diligently, even small amounts, and consistently invested in blue-chip stocks. Think well-established, financially sound companies for decades. Decades of consistency.
It was the power of steady, quiet compounding at work.
Exactly. Ronald Read's life beautifully demonstrates that when it comes to building wealth, those less glamorous behavioral skills like consistency and unwavering patience can often trump advanced financial knowledge or even a sky-high IQ.
Totally. And this really speaks to your desire, the learner, to avoid feeling overwhelmed. Understanding the psychological side of money can actually simplify things.
Right. It's not always about complex formulas. Sometimes it's about those steady, mindful actions repeated over time.
So knowing what to do isn't enough. But the sources also dig into why we all handle money so differently. And a central insight here is that no one is crazy.
That's a crucial takeaway. While someone's financial choices might appear completely irrational to us, they're almost always deeply rooted in their own unique set of life experiences. People shaped by different generations, different upbringings, different economic realities, inevitably learn very different lessons about money.
Think about it. Someone who lived through the Great Depression is going to have a fundamentally different gut reaction to risk and the importance of security than someone who came of age during, say, the booming tech era of the 90s.
Completely different worlds. Precisely. The Australian who has enjoyed 3 decades without a recession operates with a completely different baseline of financial normalcy than an American who has navigated multiple economic downturns.
Our individual experiences, even though they represent, a tiny sliver of global events, heavily shape how we perceive the financial world.
Yeah, the sources suggest this personal history could account for as much as 80% of how you think the world works financially.
Which is a lot.
And to really drive this home, consider the stark contrast between John F. Kennedy's experience during the Great Depression, where his family's wealth actually increased, and the millions of Americans who were profoundly scarred by it.
Right. He literally learned about the Depression by reading about it at Harvard.
Can you imagine?
That anecdote brilliantly illustrates how vastly different realities mold our understanding. Someone who never experienced the gut-wrenching fear of losing everything during such a crisis simply can't fully grasp its lasting impact.
No amount of academic study can truly replicate the power of that kind of fear and uncertainty. The source really emphasizes that. And this isn't just about those huge historical shifts. It's also about well, the dumb luck of when and where you were born, as the research of economists Malmendier and Nagel suggests.
Right. They discovered that individual investors' appetite for risk is heavily influenced by their personal history with macroeconomic conditions.
What's fascinating here is how this shapes even the perspectives of so-called experts. Bill Gross, the renowned bond manager.
Uh-huh, the bond king.
Yeah, him. He readily admits that his remarkable success was largely due to being born at a specific time when interest rates were in a generational decline, which significantly boosted bond prices.
So timing was huge for him.
Massively. Someone born just a decade earlier or later might have developed a completely different view of bonds as an investment.
We also get compelling examples around inflation. Someone who came of age during the high inflation 70s and 80s has a very different ingrained reaction to rising prices.
Oh, absolutely. Compared to someone who's only known the relatively low inflation of the last few decades. And think about unemployment rates. They can vary dramatically for different demographic groups at the very same time.
True. And the lasting impact of a major event like World War II further underscores this point. While the U.S. stock market flourished, markets in Germany and Japan were devastated.
Leaving a profound and long-lasting imprint on their respective financial mindsets. So what seems like a completely irrational financial decision to one person is often perfectly logical within their own unique framework of experience and understanding, even if that understanding is based on incomplete information.
Exactly. Take the seemingly puzzling example of low-income individuals buying lottery tickets. While it might appear illogical from a purely statistical perspective,
The odds are terrible.
the underlying reasoning could be that it represents the only tangible glimmer of hope for a better life they feel they can afford when other financial avenues seem completely out of reach. They are, in a sense, paying for a dream.
It really makes you stop and think twice before judging someone else's money moves.
Definitely. So we've seen how deeply personal our financial perspectives are. Now let's consider how the very financial landscape we're navigating is surprisingly new.
This is a point that most of us likely don't often ponder. The widespread expectation of retirement, where individuals personally save and invest to fund it. That's really only a phenomenon of the last 2 generations, at most.
It feels like it's always been this way, but it hasn't. Before World War II, the stark reality was that the vast majority of Americans simply worked until they died.
Yeah, Social Security was intended to provide a safety net, but its initial benefits were quite modest. And the idea of widespread private pensions before the 1970s, the sources indicate that's largely a romanticized notion.
So those good old days weren't always so golden for retirement.
Not really. The very foundation of American retirement savings as we know it, the 401k, didn't even come into existence until 1978.
1978, that's relatively recent history.
And the Roth IRA is even more recent, established in 1998. These are relatively new inventions in the grand scheme of things.
So when we find ourselves struggling with the daunting task of saving for retirement, the book suggests we're not necessarily being irrational. We're essentially newbies navigating a financial landscape that is still very much in its infancy.
Precisely. And this sense of newness extends to other significant financial domains, the massive surge in college attendance and the accompanying skyrocketing tuition costs.
Oh, yeah.
The relatively young age of index funds, those baskets of many different stocks and hedge funds, even the pervasive use of consumer debt, things like mortgages, credit cards, car loans.
All relatively new on this scale.
These are all largely post-World War II developments. We simply haven't had generations to learn from collective experience in these areas.
It really puts a lot of our current financial anxieties into a broader perspective, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, let's shift gears and delve into something that's frequently debated but notoriously difficult to quantify, the role of luck and risk.
These are intertwined forces that exert a powerful influence on every outcome in life, often far more than we readily acknowledge. As NYU professor Scott Galloway astutely put it, nothing is as good or as bad as it seems.
And the story of Bill Gates provides a perfect illustration. He had the incredibly improbable luck of attending one of the very few high schools in the world that possessed a computer in 1968.
Just mind-blowing luck.
The sheer statistical rarity of that single event is mind-boggling.
1 in a million, the source emphasizes. And this early and unique access allowed him and Paul Allen to develop crucial expertise years ahead of the vast majority of their peers.
But the story also introduces us to Ken Evans, Gates's close friend, and by all accounts, equally talented and ambitious, who tragically died young.
Oh, wow.
He very well could have been a founding partner of Microsoft, highlighting the significant role of chance. Just bad luck.
It's a sobering reminder that for every widely celebrated success story we hear, there are countless others with similar potential who are profoundly impacted by the unpredictable hand of risk.
Exactly. Because luck and risk are so inherently difficult to measure, we often tend to overlook their significant influence when we're evaluating financial success.
We have a natural tendency to attribute outcomes solely to skill or diligent effort, when in reality, chance often plays a far more significant role than we're comfortable admitting.
Robert Schiller's thought-provoking question about how we distinguish between a bad decision that happens to have a good outcome
Right.
and a good decision that unfortunately leads to a bad outcome perfectly highlights this inherent difficulty. How do you really know?
The media certainly plays a role in this, often showering attention on investors who got lucky with perhaps reckless bets, while completely ignoring those who made prudent, well-researched decisions but simply experienced a bout of bad luck.
Yeah, that skewed portrayal makes it incredibly challenging to learn what truly works in the long run, because it's so difficult to disentangle repeatable, skillful actions from mere random chance.
Exactly. The often blurry line between what constitutes bold behavior and, well, reckless gambling becomes even more indistinct when we fail to adequately consider the significant roles of both luck and risk.
Even Benjamin Graham, widely considered the father of value investing, known for his disciplined approach.
Yeah, the guru.
He saw his single greatest investment success come from a highly concentrated bet on Geico, a move that actually violated his own well-established diversification rules.
So was that skill or luck?
Was that a testament to his astute analysis or simply a stroke of extraordinary luck? Even he himself pondered that very question.
This really underscores the crucial importance of carefully studying the financial experiences of everyday, average people, rather than solely focusing on the extreme outliers who tend to dominate the financial headlines.
And create potentially misleading narratives of guaranteed success.
Right. And Bill Gates himself wisely observed, "Success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose," which serves as a powerful reminder for all of us to humbly acknowledge the significant role that luck inevitably plays in our periods of prosperity.
Absolutely. Developing a clear and honest recognition of the powerful influence of both luck and risk fosters a much-needed sense of humility and ultimately leads to a more balanced and realistic perspective on our own financial outcomes and those of others.
Well said.
Now, let's turn our attention to a concept that is absolutely central to our overall sense of well-being, but often seems remarkably elusive in the often frenzied world of finance. The idea of enough.
Ah, yes, enough. This profound concept is beautifully illustrated by the memorable anecdote involving the celebrated authors Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller at a lavish party hosted by a billionaire.
Oh, I love this story.
While the host had reportedly made more money in a single day than Heller had earned from his iconic novel Catch-22, Heller's perfectly understated retort was, "Yes, but I have something he will never have enough."
Boom. It's such a simple yet incredibly powerful statement.
It truly is. And the book powerfully follows this with the cautionary and ultimately tragic tale of Rajat Gupta,
Oh, right. The McKinsey guy.
the remarkably successful former CEO of the prestigious consulting firm McKinsey & Company. Despite having already amassed immense wealth, Gupta relentlessly pursued even more, ultimately leading to his downfall and imprisonment for insider trading.
All driven by this seemingly insatiable desire to reach the arbitrary benchmark of becoming a billionaire. It's wild.
Gupta's story starkly highlights what the source aptly calls the hardest financial skill: the ability to get the goalpost to stop moving.
If our expectations and desires constantly escalate in lockstep with our financial achievements, we inevitably find ourselves in a perpetual state of dissatisfaction, constantly chasing an ever-receding target.
And this can tragically lead to taking on increasingly greater and ultimately ruinous risks in a never-ending and ultimately futile pursuit of more.
The insidious nature of social comparison further fuels this cycle of dissatisfaction. Consider the rookie baseball player who might be earning, say, $500,000 a year,
Which sounds great.
yet still feels relatively poor when comparing his earnings to a superstar like Mike Trout, who in turn might find himself comparing his own considerable wealth to the astronomical fortunes of the top-tier hedge fund managers.
It becomes a relentless and ultimately joyless upward comparison. There's always someone with more.
Always. And the inherent danger of never truly feeling like you have enough can tragically lead to profoundly unethical behavior, as we saw with the devastating Ponzi scheme orchestrated by Bernie Madoff.
The source wisely emphasizes that there are fundamentally many things that are simply never worth risking, no matter how tantalizing the potential financial gain might seem.
Yeah, things like reputation, family, freedom.
Exactly. Gupta himself, after enduring his prison experience, poignantly reflected on the paramount importance of not becoming overly attached to transient things like reputation or professional accomplishments.
It really brings home the crucial idea that true and lasting wealth isn't simply about the endless accumulation of more and more money.
Right.
It's fundamentally about recognizing and appreciating when you have sufficient resources to live a fulfilling and meaningful life, and actively resisting the seductive urge for relentless accumulation at all costs, even at the potential expense of your integrity and well-being.
Precisely. It's about thoughtfully defining your own personal definition of enough, a deeply personal introspective exercise, and then consciously focusing on the things that truly bring you lasting satisfaction and fulfillment far beyond mere monetary wealth.
Okay, now for a concept that is absolutely fundamental to building long-term wealth, yet often significantly underestimated in its subtle power, the remarkable phenomenon of compounding.
Ah, compounding. The eighth wonder of the world, supposedly.
Well, its power is truly extraordinary, and its fundamental nature is often quite counterintuitive to our linear way of thinking. The book offers a compelling example with Milutin Milankovitch's groundbreaking theory of ice ages, which posits that incredibly tiny, almost imperceptible changes in the Earth's orbital position over vast periods of time can ultimately lead to enormous and dramatic long-term shifts in global climate.
Wow. Okay. So small changes, big long-term effects.
Exactly. This serves as a perfect and profound parallel to how seemingly small, consistent investment returns, when patiently sustained over extended periods, can eventually snowball into truly significant wealth. Think of it like a snowball rolling downhill. It starts small but grows faster and faster over time.
We get a really insightful comparison between Jim Simons, the brilliant mind behind Renaissance Technologies, who has consistently achieved remarkably high annual investment returns.
Like insanely high returns.
And the legendary Warren Buffett, whose annual returns, while still exceptional, are comparatively lower. However, Buffett's overall net worth is vastly greater.
Primarily due to the significantly longer period over which he has been consistently compounding his returns. The hypothetical calculation presented in the book, illustrating what Simon's net worth might be if he had started with Buffett's initial capital and enjoyed the same incredibly long investment horizon. Well, it's nothing short of staggering.
It powerfully illustrates how even seemingly modest differences in annual growth rates, when consistently sustained over truly extended periods, can ultimately lead to extraordinarily different financial outcomes.
We also see this same principle at play in the exponential growth of data storage capacity in the technology sector. Even tech visionaries like Bill Gates initially underestimated just how rapidly things could grow in that domain.
Right, famously expressing skepticism about Gmail's then massive 1 GB storage offering.
Exactly. It highlights our inherent difficulty in truly grasping the nature of exponential progression.
The book even provocatively suggests that perhaps the most crucial book on investing anyone could ever read should simply be a long-term chart illustrating the historical growth of the global economy, perhaps aptly titled, "Shut Up and Wait."
Huh. I like that. The core idea here is that the often counterintuitive nature of compounding frequently leads people to become impatient and chase after the allure of potentially high but often unsustainable returns,
Instead of just being patient.
rather than patiently focusing on achieving consistent, even if seemingly only pretty good, returns that are reliably sustained over the long haul.
And as the source subtly hints, this relentless pursuit of quick riches and outsized returns often tragically culminates in stories of fortunes ultimately lost due to excessive risk-taking.
The true and often overlooked magic of compounding lies not in spectacular short-term gains, but rather in its quiet consistency and the sheer power of a sufficiently long time horizon.
Okay, so getting wealthy and staying wealthy, are they fundamentally the same game requiring the same set of skills? The excerpts make a compelling argument that they are, in fact, not.
This is a really critical distinction to understand. The very skills and mindset that might help you initially accumulate wealth can be quite different, even diametrically opposed to those essential for effectively preserving that wealth over the long term.
We see this illustrated through the contrasting experiences of figures like Jesse Livermore, the legendary speculator who made a fortune during the 1929 stock market crash,
But then lost it all later.
but later tragically lost it all due to overconfidence and reckless trading, and Abraham Jermansky, who was utterly ruined by the very same crash, highlighting the fragility of wealth.
Yet making money might often involve a degree of bold risk-taking and assertive action, but the crucial task of keeping and growing that money over time necessitates a different set of qualities. Humility in the face of success, a healthy fear of potential losses,
Right.
consistent frugality, and a deep and ongoing acknowledgement of the significant role that luck likely played in your past financial successes.
You simply cannot afford to assume that those past successes will automatically and endlessly repeat themselves in the future.
Yeah, exactly. Michael Moritz, a highly successful venture capitalist at Sequoia Capital, emphasizes the critical importance of maintaining a constant fear of going out of business for achieving long-term success.
That sounds stressful.
Well, it's about cultivating a mindset of perpetual vigilance, remaining healthily paranoid, and diligently avoiding complacency at all costs.
And Warren Buffett's remarkable success story isn't solely about his knack for picking winning investments. It's equally about the things he consciously chose not to do.
Like,
Avoid excessive and crippling debt, resist the urge to panic and make rash decisions during market downturns, and fiercely protect his hard-earned reputation. Survival is key.
we also hear the cautionary tale of Rick Guerin, who was often referred to as the third member of Buffett and Munger's early investing group. While he possessed similar intellectual firepower, he ultimately didn't achieve their extraordinary level of long-term success.
Why not?
Because he was, in his own words, in a hurry. This perfectly underscores the vital importance of patience and a long-term perspective in the often slow process of wealth accumulation.
So being in a hurry can actually cost you.
Immensely. And the fundamental concept of margin of safety becomes absolutely crucial in this context of preserving wealth.
Explain that a bit.
It's about building in a substantial buffer through prudent budgeting, maintaining flexible thinking, and consistently adopting a long-term outlook to significantly increase your overall chances of survival and long-term financial success, even if your initial analytical edge is relatively small.
So preparing for things to go wrong, essentially.
Precisely. The book provides some rather stark historical statistics detailing numerous wars, significant company failures, recurring economic recessions, periodic stock market crashes,
All the bad stuff.
all juxtaposed against the overarching long-term trend of steadily increasing living standards. This really drives home the essential need for cultivating both a degree of short-term paranoia to help you navigate the inevitable bumps in the road,
Yeah.
and a resilient long-term optimism to allow you to ultimately benefit from overall societal progress. You need both.
It's important to remember that it's actually quite normal for many individual investments to fail, and we really shouldn't overreact emotionally when they do. Even beloved early creations from a powerhouse like Disney often struggled financially in their initial stages.
Right. And the venture capital industry is a prime example of a tail-driven sector where a tiny percentage of investments generate the vast majority of the returns, and a significant number fail completely.
So you expect failures in that world.
Absolutely. And even seemingly invincible and highly successful companies, like Kuroko Pictures, they made Terminator 2,
Mhm.
can ultimately succumb to unforeseen challenges and go bankrupt.
Wow.
The overall long-term success of the market as a whole is often disproportionately driven by a relatively small number of truly exceptional performers. This same principle applies to individual investors as well. A few key, well-timed decisions often have the most significant impact on your overall financial trajectory.
Napoleon's astute observation about a true military genius being someone who can calmly do the average thing effectively when everyone else around them is losing their minds.
Yeah, is perfectly applicable to the world of investing. It's about maintaining a steady and rational approach during times of significant market volatility and emotional extremes.
The acceptance of failures as an inherent part of achieving massive tail successes is a key element in the long-term strategies of innovative companies like Amazon and Netflix.
They embrace failure as part of the process.
Right. Even Warren Buffett, despite his legendary track record, has readily admitted to his share of dud picks over his long career. Everyone makes mistakes.
And George Soros, the renowned investor, astutely summarized a crucial aspect of this by saying, It's not whether you're right or wrong that's important, but how much money you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong.
That's powerful. You can actually be wrong a significant portion of the time and still achieve remarkable long-term results if your winners really win big and your losers don't kill you. The analogy of the vastness of the galaxy and the extreme rarity of intelligent life within it serves as a powerful illustration of the potential of these long tails and the impact of seemingly unlikely but profoundly significant successes over vast timescales.
Mhm. It's about those outliers driving the whole thing.
Now let's shift our focus to what the book compellingly argues is the true definition of wealth. It's likely not what immediately comes to mind when you think about being wealthy.
According to the sources, the highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want today. It fundamentally boils down to having control over your most precious resource, your time.
Control over time. That really resonates on a deep level. Research conducted by the psychologist Angus Campbell strongly suggests that overall happiness is significantly linked to having a sense of control over one's own life.
Often even more so than just income level or other standard demographic factors. It's about autonomy.
We get a particularly compelling story from the successful entrepreneur Derek Sivers, who intentionally achieved a state of freedom at the relatively young age of 22.
Wow.
By diligently saving a comparatively modest amount of money, just enough to cover his basic living expenses. This financial buffer then allowed him the invaluable freedom to wholeheartedly pursue his passion for music without being solely driven by immediate financial needs.
So true wealth, in this insightful sense, becomes more about having control over your time and your choices, rather than simply accumulating vast sums of money.
Despite the United States currently being the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, studies consistently show that Americans don't appear to be significantly happier on average than they were back in the 1950s.
A time when overall wealth levels were considerably lower. It's a fascinating paradox.
It strongly suggests that accumulating more and more money beyond a certain comfortable threshold doesn't automatically translate into greater happiness or fulfillment.
The example of John D. Rockefeller, one of history's wealthiest individuals, deeply valuing dedicated thinking time, highlights this very point.
Right, he prioritized unstructured time.
In today's rapidly evolving knowledge-based economy, where our primary tools, our own brains, are constantly with us and connected, the lines between work and leisure can become increasingly blurred.
Potentially diminishing our sense of control over our time. Derek Thompson of The Atlantic even poignantly describes the modern factory as simply the day itself, underscoring this pervasive sense of diminished control.
Oof, that hits home.
And poignant research conducted with the elderly by Carl Pilmer consistently reveals a very common and deeply felt regret, not having spent more quality time with their loved ones throughout their lives.
It really brings the true value of time autonomy into sharp focus.
Absolutely.
True and meaningful wealth ultimately empowers us to prioritize what truly matters most to us.
Our time, our relationship.
Our vital relationships, and the experiences that enrich our lives far beyond mere financial metrics.
Now, the excerpts delve into the somewhat ironic topic of the often powerful seduction of external validation. We frequently pursue wealth, at least in part, to signal our status to others and, be admired and respected by them.
But the often uncomfortable reality is that other people are typically far more preoccupied with their own desires, aspirations, and yes, even their own perceived status in the eyes of others.
The insightful anecdote about the valet and the drivers of the expensive Ferraris perfectly illustrates this point.
Why?
The casual observer is usually far more impressed by the gleaming car itself and likely fantasizes about themselves owning it rather than genuinely admiring the person behind the wheel.
Ah, right. They're projecting themselves into the car, not admiring the driver.
Exactly. The same principle subtly applies to many of the material possessions we often associate with wealth: sprawling houses, expensive jewelry, designer clothing.
The book wisely suggests that genuine and lasting respect and admiration from others are far more likely to stem from qualities like humility, genuine kindness, and heartfelt empathy
Than from any outward display of material wealth. It's a powerful and humbling reminder to consciously focus on cultivating those intrinsic human qualities rather than constantly seeking fleeting validation through the acquisition of external and often superficial symbols of wealth.
Well put. Now let's discuss a concept that might seem a bit counterintuitive at first glance. The idea of wealth as what you don't see.
This is a truly crucial concept to grasp. True wealth isn't the flashy new car parked in the driveway or the expensive watch adorning your wrist.
Right.
Rather, it's the accumulated savings tucked away, the investments quietly growing, the money that you have consciously chosen not to spend.
The illustrated story of Roger with the brand new Porsche perfectly embodies this. While he might certainly appear outwardly rich to casual observers,
He looks rich.
the reality is that he could simply be prioritizing outward appearances and conspicuous consumption over the less visible but far more enduring process of genuine wealth accumulation. He might be drowning in debt for all we know.
The book astutely emphasizes that the true engine of building lasting wealth has far more to do with your personal savings rate, that often significant gap between your ego-driven desires and your actual income.
Than it does with the absolute level of your income or even the specific returns you achieve on your investments. It's about how much you keep.
And the inherent value of this often unseen wealth lies in the invaluable flexibility and optionality that it provides.
Flexibility, how so?
Even a seemingly modest amount of savings readily accessible in a bank account, even if it's not earning substantial interest, can offer an extraordinary and often overlooked return simply by affording you the freedom to make different life choices.
Like what?
This could include having the ability to pursue a lower-paying but far more personally fulfilling job, or having the financial runway to patiently wait for more attractive investment opportunities to arise. Options.
That makes sense. This crucial element of financial flexibility is becoming increasingly important in our hyperconnected and rapidly globalizing world, where intelligence and specialized skills alone are becoming less of a reliable and sustainable competitive advantage.
Why is that?
The pool of talented individuals you are potentially competing with on a global scale is vast and ever-expanding. So just being smart isn't enough anymore.
In this environment, the agility and adaptability that a solid financial foundation your unseen wealth provides become a critical differentiator.
The intriguing story of Julius Wagner Jareg and his initially ridiculed but ultimately Nobel Prize-winning approach to treating syphilis by deliberately inducing malaria-induced fevers.
Okay, that sounds crazy.
It does. But it serves as a compelling analogy here. It highlights the significant value of thinking unconventionally and having the inherent flexibility to pursue seemingly crazy ideas that can ultimately lead to groundbreaking results.
This also connects to the important idea of being reasonable rather than strictly rational when it comes to making financial decisions.
What's the difference?
Our complex human emotions and the various real-world constraints we face often play a significant role in shaping our financial choices, often in ways that pure, cold logic might not dictate. Harry Markowitz's initial decision to adopt a seemingly simplistic 50-50 split between bonds and equities in his own portfolio.
The father of modern portfolio theory did that.
Yeah. Primarily to minimize his potential for future regret. It's a perfect example of a reasonable, even if not perfectly mathematically rational, approach. He wanted to sleep at night.
Okay, that makes sense. Other common examples of reasonable, if not strictly economically rational, financial behaviors include the well-documented home bias in investing.
Where you mostly invest in your own country.
Right. Or the enjoyment many derive from picking a small number of individual stocks, even if a diversified index fund approach might offer superior risk-adjusted returns.
So doing things that aren't perfectly optimal but help you stay the course.
Exactly. These behaviors, while not perfectly optimal in a purely theoretical sense, can be reasonable ways for individuals to stay engaged with their finances and avoid potentially more detrimental emotional responses.
Now, the book offers a crucial word of caution. We must be acutely aware of the inherent limitations of relying solely on historical data to predict the future, especially in dynamic and evolving fields like finance.
The book warns against the potentially dangerous historians as prophets fallacy, the tendency to place excessive and often unwarranted faith in past data as a flawless predictor of future outcomes.
Especially in sectors characterized by constant innovation and unforeseen disruptions, like tech or finance itself.
Right. Investing, the book argues, is fundamentally different in this regard from more stable and predictable fields like geology, meteorology, or even medicine, where core principles tend to remain relatively constant over time.
The book powerfully illustrates this point by presenting a diverse list of highly impactful individuals ranging from figures like Hitler and Stalin to Bill Gates.
Quite a range.
And groundbreaking inventions like the airplane and the internet that have dramatically reshaped the course of history in ways that were virtually impossible to foresee. These so-called black swan events.
Highly improbable events with a significant impact.
Right. They highlight the inherent uncertainty and unpredictability that pervades human affairs and, by extension, the financial markets.
Indeed, the vast majority of significant economic shifts and market disruptions throughout history can be traced back to a relatively small handful of past events that were essentially impossible to predict with any degree of certainty beforehand.
Trying to accurately predict the complex and ever-changing future based solely on extrapolating from past data often reflect a fundamental failure of imagination on our part.
The renowned behavioral economist Daniel Kahneman offered a profound insight in this regard. The lesson to learn from surprises is that the world is surprising.
Simple, but deep.
Exactly. The only truly reliable forecast we can make with any confidence is that unexpected surprises will continue to be the most significant drivers of change and volatility in the financial landscape.
Moreover, it's crucial to recognize that there have been numerous significant structural changes in the global economy and the financial system itself. For example, the relatively young age of widespread retirement savings plans like 401ks that make direct and simplistic comparisons to past economic conditions inherently misleading.
Even the unusually long gap we've experienced between recent recessions could potentially be indicative of some underlying structural shifts in the economy.
And while John Templeton's often quoted warning about the dangers of the phrase, "it's different this time," certainly holds some truth.
You hear that all the time.
The undeniable reality is that the world does constantly change in fundamental ways, and these changes are precisely what ultimately matter most over the long run.
Therefore, the book wisely advocates for building a significant room for error into our financial planning by consciously assuming potentially lower future investment returns than the historical averages might suggest.
So don't just assume the past repeats perfectly.
Right. This acts as a crucial margin of safety to help protect us against the inevitable unforeseen events and market fluctuations that the future will undoubtedly hold.
The barbell strategy, a concept of strategically allocating your financial resources with one portion dedicated to taking calculated risks, while another significant portion is managed very conservatively,
Is presented as another effective way to ensure long-term financial survival and resilience in the face of uncertainty. You need both safety and potential growth.
You need to have a sufficiently stable base to weather unexpected storms and allow your riskier investments the necessary time to potentially generate meaningful returns.
And these unforeseen events aren't always massive global economic crises. They can be intensely personal disruptions, the sudden loss of a job, unexpected major medical expenses.
Or even something as mundane as a burst water pipe causing significant damage. Life happens.
Exactly. The book emphasizes that relying solely on a single source of income, like a regular paycheck, without building up a sufficient emergency savings buffer is arguably the single biggest point of potential financial failure for most individuals.
Ultimately, the most critically important part of any sound financial plan isn't the specific details of the plan itself, but rather proactively planning for the very real possibility that things will not go according to that initial plan.
Plan for the plan to fail, essentially.
Exactly. Building in that crucial buffer for the inevitable, unexpected curveballs life throws our way is absolutely paramount for long-term financial well-being.
Now let's consider the subtle but powerful ways in which our perceptions of our future selves can significantly impact our long-term financial planning, a phenomenon known as the end of history illusion.
The end of history illusion? What's that?
This fascinating psychological concept highlights our common human tendency to believe that our future selves will largely resemble our present selves.
Like, we think we're done changing.
Sort of. They will have the same core desires, priorities, and values. The poignant anecdote about the incredibly hardworking friend who finally achieved his long-sought-after career goals, only to find himself deeply unhappy due to the overwhelming stress and relentlessly long working hours.
Oh, I know people like that.
It perfectly illustrates how we can often be quite poor forecasters of our own future emotional states and preferences. We think we know what will make us happy, but
We might be wrong. This end-of-history illusion can create significant challenges when it comes to making effective long-term financial plans. Charlie Munger's well-known advice to never interrupt compounding unnecessarily.
makes perfect sense in theory.
But our own evolving desires and life circumstances can certainly lead us to deviate from even the most well-intentioned long-term financial strategies.
While the consistent dedication of individuals like Ronald Read and Warren Buffett to long-term compounding has clearly yielded remarkable success, the reality is that many people find it difficult to maintain such unwavering consistency as their aspirations and life situations naturally shift over time.
We change, our goals change.
Right. The book thoughtfully suggests that perhaps it's more realistic and helpful to view our financial lives not as one continuous monolithic span, but rather as potentially multiple distinct 20-year blocks.
Interesting perspective.
This acknowledges the very high likelihood that our goals, priorities, and overall perspectives will evolve in significant ways over such extended periods.
Because of this inherent human tendency to change, it's often wise to consciously avoid the extreme ends of the financial planning spectrum.
Right, what?
Whether that's extreme, almost deprivation level frugality in our younger years, or the relentless pursuit of ever-increasing income at the expense of personal well-being.
Those extreme approaches might hold initial appeal, but the potential downsides can become lasting regrets as our priorities naturally evolve.
Cultivating a sense of balance at every stage of our lives significantly increases the odds of sticking with a sound financial plan and ultimately minimizing future regrets. Endurance, whether in our savings habits or career pursuits, or even our personal relationships, is often the key to long-term compounding success in all areas of life.
Absolutely. Finding that sustainable middle ground and consciously avoiding drastic or overly rigid measures in our financial planning can lead to greater long-term financial well-being and significantly reduce the likelihood of future regret as our lives inevitably unfold in unexpected ways.
Okay, so most worthwhile endeavors in life come with a certain price, right? And the book astutely argues that achieving long-term success in investing is certainly no exception. However, the price we must be willing to pay in the realm of finance isn't always immediately obvious or, monetary in nature.
That's a crucial point. The often overlooked price of long-term investing success frequently manifests as emotional costs. The inevitable volatility of the market,
The ups and downs.
the gnawing fear during downturns, the persistent self-doubt that creeps in, the inherent uncertainty of the future, and even the occasional pangs of regret over missed opportunities or perceived mistakes.
These are the psychological fees we must be prepared to pay.
Exactly. Ironically, attempting to completely avoid this inherent price of investing can often lead to significantly worse long-term financial outcomes.
We see this play out in examples like General Electric, GE, under Jack Welch's leadership, where aggressive earnings manipulation was used in part to artificially smooth out short-term volatility in the company's stock price.
Trying to make things look predictable when they weren't.
Right. While this might have provided a temporary illusion of stability, it ultimately contributed to massive financial losses later on.
Similarly, the actions of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae in underreporting earnings to create a false sense of predictable growth ultimately contributed to the systemic risks that led to the 2008 financial crisis.
These examples strongly suggest that trying to circumvent the natural price of investing, the inherent ups and downs of the market, can have severe long-term consequences.
The book persuasively argues that this volatility should be viewed not as a fine or a punishment to be avoided at all costs,
Right.
but rather as a necessary fee, the cost of admission, if you will, for the potential of achieving higher long-term returns that historically have been associated with more volatile asset classes like stocks.
So you pay the fee, volatility, for the chance of higher returns.
Indeed, the historical data clearly shows that the long-term returns of more volatile assets like stocks have generally been significantly higher than those of less volatile assets like cash and government bonds. In the world of finance, you generally do get what you pay for.
And enduring a certain level of volatility is often the price of admission for potentially greater long-term rewards. So embracing the inherent volatility and uncertainty is often an unavoidable and necessary part of the journey towards achieving long-term investing success.
Okay, let's navigate the often murky waters of market bubbles. The book makes a compelling case that they are notoriously difficult to learn from,
Why is that?
because the underlying causes are almost always hotly debated, even with the benefit of hindsight.
That's absolutely true. No one who owns an asset that has significantly appreciated in value wants to believe that it's actually overvalued and part of a potentially collapsing bubble.
Nope. As a result, the very notion of a market bubble is often met with considerable skepticism and controversy. With the clarity of hindsight, we tend to readily point fingers and assign blame, rather than thoughtfully extracting valuable and applicable lessons for the future.
Consider the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s. While the astronomical valuations of many internet companies might seem patently absurd in retrospect.
Pets.com, anyone.
Right. Many investors with relatively short-term trading horizons could have actually found it perfectly rational to buy shares of companies like Yahoo, simply because the stock price was rapidly going up.
The powerful and often irresistible force of money-chasing returns can create its own self-fulfilling momentum in the short run. Momentum trading.
This momentum often attracts a significant influx of short-term traders who are primarily focused on capturing quick gains, even if the underlying long-term valuations of the assets have become completely detached from any reasonable fundamental basis.
And the increasing prevalence of quarterly reporting cycles in the corporate world has likely also contributed to a greater emphasis on short-term performance and the relentless pursuit of those immediate returns.
The housing bubble of the mid-2000s provides another compelling example where the allure of quickly flipping properties could have temporarily justified irrationally high prices.
That would have made absolutely no sense for individuals intending to be long-term homeowners. Different games being played.
Exactly. So the formation of market bubbles isn't necessarily solely attributable to irrational long-term investing behavior. It can often be driven by perfectly rational short-term trading strategies that are heavily based on exploiting market momentum.
This critical insight underscores the vital importance of clearly understanding your own individual time horizon as an investor
Know your game.
and consciously avoiding being unduly influenced by the actions and motivations of those who are clearly playing a fundamentally different financial game than you are.
Identifying the specific game you're playing, whether you're a long-term investor, a short-term trader, or something in between, is absolutely fundamental to effectively managing your money and making sound financial decisions that align with your own goals and risk tolerance.
As a practical example, the book mentions the host's personal investment philosophy as primarily a passive investor with a very long-term outlook based on the anticipated continued growth of the global economy.
Clearly defining your own game helps you to effectively filter out the constant noise and short-term fluctuations of the market and remain focused on your overarching objectives.
Okay, now let's touch upon the often pervasive seduction of pessimism. It frequently seems to hold a more powerful grip on our collective psyche than optimism does.
That's a keen observation. The book argues that pessimism isn't just more prevalent in financial commentary, it often inherently sounds more intellectually sophisticated
Yeah, smarter somehow.
and tends to receive far more widespread attention and credibility than optimism, which can often be dismissed as naive or unrealistic.
It's important to establish a clear definition of optimism in this context. It's not about blindly believing that everything will always be wonderful.
It's not Pollyanna.
No. Rather, it's a more nuanced belief that the probability of good outcomes occurring over the long term is generally in your favor, despite the inevitable setbacks and challenges that will undoubtedly arise along the way.
It's the underlying conviction that, by and large, most people in systems are striving to make things better over time. The late Hans Rosling, with his data-driven perspective, aptly described himself as a possibilist.
I like that. And the contrast with pessimism is indeed stark. The book cites the illustrative example of the Wall Street Journal publishing a rather dire doomsday prediction from a Russian professor all the way back in December 2008,
Right at the bottom.
right at the peak of the global financial crisis. Compare that with how often genuinely optimistic predictions about long-term economic growth are met with skepticism, even when robust historical data support such a view, like, say, Japan's recovery after WWII.
People in general tend to perceive the world as a far more frightening and hopeless place than the objective data actually suggests.
The insightful philosopher John Stuart Mill astutely observed how those who express despair when others hold on to hope are often paradoxically admired as profound sages.
Weird, isn't it?
There's likely a deep-seated evolutionary basis for this psychological bias. Our well-documented asymmetric aversion to loss makes potential threats feel far more urgent and impactful than potential gains. We're wired for it.
And because money is such a ubiquitous and central element in almost everyone's life, financial pessimism tends to capture our collective attention far more readily and intensely than localized negative news or the often slower, less dramatic unfolding of positive long-term trends.
Unlike a regional disaster, like a hurricane affecting a specific area, widespread financial pessimism can create a sense that everyone, everywhere, is potentially at risk.
Growth often happens gradually through the compounding of incremental gains, while significant destruction and a loss of confidence can occur with startling speed.
Making pessimistic narratives feel far more immediate and seemingly relevant. Consider the remarkable long-term decline in mortality rates from heart disease, a truly profound positive trend.
Saved millions of lives.
But this gradual progress rarely captures headlines in the same way that a sudden tragic event does.
The same principle applies in the business world, the slow, steady building of enduring importance versus a sudden overnight bankruptcy, and in the stock market. Slow accumulation of gains versus rapid, dramatic declines.
The book shares a wonderfully insightful perspective from the philanthropist Chuck Feeney, who, when asked how he felt about giving away his entire fortune, replied, "Get this, my expectations were reduced to 0 when I was 21. Everything since then has been a bonus."
Wow, talk about managing expectations.
Right. It offers a powerful lesson. It suggests that perhaps expecting difficult things might ironically lead to more pleasant surprises in the long run.
Finally, let's delve into the often underestimated power of stories in shaping our financial realities.
The book presents a fascinating thought experiment. Imagine an alien observing the United States economy in both 2007 and 2009.
Okay.
From a purely tangible perspective, the physical infrastructure, the available resources, the underlying human capital would have remained largely unchanged. Yet, during that brief period, economic sentiment shifted dramatically.
So what changed?
The book argues that the only truly significant change was the collection of stories that people collectively believed about the economy. The narrative surrounding housing prices, the perceived prudence of bankers, the assessment of market risk.
The sudden and widespread collapse of the previously dominant narrative of ever-rising housing prices triggered a cascading series of events that ultimately led to a major global economic crisis.
Stories, the book compellingly argues, are arguably the most powerful and fundamental force driving our economies, acting as either powerful fuel propelling growth or as significant brakes stifling progress.
And on a deeply personal level, the more intensely you want something to be true,
Yeah.
the more likely you are to readily believe a story, however flimsy the evidence, that significantly overestimates its probability. This can lead us to embrace what the book aptly terms appealing fictions.
Appealing fictions. Things we desperately want to believe despite having limited control over the outcome and facing potentially high stakes.
The book shares a disturbing anecdote about villagers in Yemen resorting to a dangerous folk remedy on a sick child, driven by their profound desperation and a willingness to believe anything that offered a glimmer of hope for a cure.
Oh, that's tough.
Yes.
But it sadly parallels numerous historical examples of ineffective and even harmful medical practices that persisted before the widespread adoption of the scientific method.
And even the enduring allure of seemingly too good to be true financial schemes like Bernie Madoff's infamous Ponzi, people wanted to believe.
These powerful examples underscore the critical importance of building in a significant room for error in our financial lives, maintaining a flexible mindset that can adapt to changing realities, and cultivating a degree of financial independence that provides a crucial buffer against the seductive pull of appealing but potentially false narratives.
The book concludes this section with a poignant analogy of a baby constantly creating mental models to understand the world, suggesting that the alien observer is, in a sense, all of us, often unknowingly swayed by the powerful but often unseen stories that ultimately drive our financial decisions and the broader economy.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive into the intricate psychology of money. Now, the final section of these insightful excerpts offers some valuable confessions and actionable lessons that we can all take to heart.
Yes. And the book introduces this final part with a rather unsettling story about a horribly botched dentist appointment.
Using it as a powerful analogy to highlight the inherent dangers of offering generalized financial advice without having a deep understanding of an individual's specific circumstances, goals, and risk tolerance.
Just as the practice of medicine is incredibly complex and the interactions between doctor and patient are uniquely personal, so too is the realm of financial guidance. One size fits none.
Exactly. As the hosts of this deep dive, we certainly cannot and should not attempt to tell you, our listener, the learner, exactly what you should do with your hard-earned money.
We just don't know your situation.
Because we simply don't have the intimate knowledge of your specific financial situation, your long-term goals, your personal timeline, and your underlying motivations.
However, just as there are certain fundamental principles of health and well-being that generally apply to most people, there are also some universal truths that underpin sound financial decision-making.
With that important caveat in mind, the book offers a concise set of actionable recommendations. First, cultivate genuine humility in times of success and practice forgiveness towards yourself in times of failure.
Always recognizing the significant roles that both luck and risk inevitably play in our financial outcomes.
Right.
Second, consciously prioritize building less ego and accumulating more actual wealth by focusing diligently on saving that crucial gap between your desires and your income.
Third, strive to manage your money in a way that ultimately allows you to sleep soundly at night, understanding that this level of comfort will vary from person to person.
Fourth, leverage your money to gain greater control over your most precious asset, your time, which the book rightly identifies as the highest dividend that wealth can truly provide.
Fifth, practice being kinder and less outwardly flashy in your financial dealings, as genuine and lasting respect from others is far more likely to stem from your kindness and humility than from any ostentatious display of material possessions.
Sixth, simply make it a consistent habit to save a portion of your income, even if you don't have a specific immediate goal in mind. This accumulated savings acts as a vital hedge against life's inevitable unexpected surprises. Seventh, thoughtfully define the inherent price of long-term investment success, which includes uncertainty, doubt, and occasional regret, and consciously be ready to pay that price.
Viewing it as a necessary fee for potential long-term gains rather than as a personal punishment to be avoided at all cost.
Right. Eighth, actively cultivate and worship the concept of room for error in your financial planning, recognizing it as absolutely crucial for long-term financial endurance and the uninterrupted power of compounding.
And finally, ninth, consciously avoid making extreme financial decisions at either end of the spectrum, as this will significantly minimize the likelihood of future regret as your own goals and desires naturally evolve over time. Balance is key.
The book also includes a brief personal anecdote about the host's own parents' sensible and consistent financial habits, which ultimately led them to a place of financial independence.
It further touches on the hosts and their spouses' conscious approach to maintaining a moderate lifestyle and diligently prioritizing savings as the primary pathway to that same crucial independence.
The key insight here is the profound benefit of getting the goalpost of lifestyle desires to stop constantly moving upwards, finding your enough.
The ultimate and enduring message is the paramount importance of consistently saving a portion of your income to provide a vital buffer against life's inevitable, unexpected curveballs.
And to patiently harness the remarkable power of allowing your investments to compound uninterrupted over the long term.
Finally, the excerpts conclude with a valuable postscript titled, "A Brief History of Why the U.S. Consumer Thinks the Way They Do," which offers some really crucial historical context for understanding our current financial behaviors.
This final section vividly sets the scene in 1945, immediately following the unprecedented economic boom that occurred during and after World War II.
Someone waking up from that era and suddenly finding themselves in today's economic landscape and observing current consumer behavior would likely experience, well, a significant degree of shock and bewilderment.
The immediate post-war period was characterized by three major and interconnected forces. First, significant pent-up demand for housing and consumer goods due to wartime production shifts.
People wanted stuff they couldn't get during the war.
Second, a substantial credit boom fueled by intentionally low interest rates, strategically controlled by the Federal Reserve,
To help finance the war effort and subsequently encourage consumer spending. Make borrowing easy.
and third, a largely hidden but incredibly potent productivity boom stemming from technological advancements and manufacturing innovations of the 1930s that truly materialized in the booming 1950s.
We witnessed a dramatic surge in sales of cars and new homes during that immediate post-war era, and crucially, the economic gains during the period from the 1950s through the 1980s were more equitably shared across the income spectrum, with similar rates of real income growth experienced by both the bottom 20% and the top 5% of earners. Things felt more equal, relatively speaking.
This period also saw increased labor force participation among women and significant progress in civil rights, contributing to a broader sense of equalizing lifestyles across different segments of society.
While household debt did rise noticeably during the decade from 1947 to 1957, the crucial difference compared to more recent periods was that income growth was generally strong enough to comfortably manage this increasing debt burden.
But then things changed.
Right. The economic shifts that began in the 1970s and accelerated into the early 2000s brought about a period of much more uneven economic growth, Yet the ingrained post-World War II expectations of relatively similar lifestyle trajectories across different income levels unfortunately persisted as a powerful cultural anchor.
The Morning in America rhetoric of the Reagan era, while optimistic, also signaled a fundamental shift towards a new economic reality characterized by increasingly divergent wealth distribution.
The book highlights the stark statistics showing the significant disparity in income growth between the top 1% of earners and the remaining 99% from the 1990s onwards. The gap widened dramatically.
The critical point here is that the enduring cultural expectation of relatively similar lifestyle possibilities, deeply rooted in the post-World War II era of greater economic equality.
Increasingly clashed with the stark reality of growing income inequality. This disconnect likely contributed to a rise in household debt, as many individuals attempted to maintain a perceived standard of living that their stagnant or slowly growing incomes could no longer fully support.
So people borrowed to keep up appearances or just keep up?
Essentially, we've seen a consistent trend of increasing average home sizes, rising average car loan amounts, soaring college costs, and a steady climb in household debt-to-income ratios in more recent decades.
This historical context directly relates to economist Hyman Minsky's insightful descriptions of how debt crises tend to originate, and it provides a crucial lens through which to understand the underlying dynamics that contributed to the devastating 2008 financial crisis.
And the policy responses to the 2008 crisis, while arguably necessary to prevent a complete economic collapse, disproportionately benefited asset owners who are generally concentrated at the higher end of the wealth spectrum.
Which potentially widened the gap further.
The postscript concludes by suggesting that these deeply ingrained post-World War II expectations are incredibly difficult to shake, and that various sociopolitical movements and events, like the Tea Party, Occupy Wall Street, Brexit, the rise of Donald Trump,
Quite a mix.
can be partially understood as responses to a pervasive feeling that stuff isn't working within that long-established historical context.
The author suggests that this era of widespread dissatisfaction and a demand for potentially radical change may unfortunately persist for some time to come.
So as we bring this deep dive into the psychology of money to a close, the overarching theme is powerfully clear. Truly understanding the psychological forces at play in our personal finances is absolutely crucial for making sound and sustainable financial decisions.
And ultimately achieving a genuine sense of enough. Our individual life experiences, often shaped by unpredictable events, mold our financial beliefs and behaviors far more profoundly than any set of abstract rules or mathematical formulas ever could.
Our core mission today, The Learner, was to provide you with a valuable shortcut to becoming well-informed on these critical topics by carefully extracting the most important nuggets of knowledge and surprising insights from the fascinating excerpts you shared.
And now a final thought for you to consider as you move forward. Take some dedicated time to reflect on your own unique money story. What are the pivotal experiences, the influential figures, and the deeply ingrained narratives that have collectively shaped your fundamental financial beliefs and behaviors?
Developing a clearer understanding of these often subconscious influences can be the very first and most significant step towards making more intentional, more aligned, and ultimately more fulfilling financial decisions as you navigate your own financial journey.
Perhaps delving further into the fascinating field of behavioral finance might be a worthwhile area for your next exploration.
Thank you for joining us on this illuminating deep dive.
Until our next exploration.